In the last installment of Climate Change in West Virginia, we explained how climate change is caused by greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide and how climate change creates a water cycle intensification.
When the atmosphere warms, it expands. And when the atmosphere expands, it can hold more water.
We also talked about how carbon dioxide lasts for thousands of years in the atmosphere and how the fossil fuel industry has been on a 4-decade-long campaign to discredit climate change.
The science has almost been quieted by this whole political and partisan rhetoric that accompanies climate change.
So West Virginians arguably struggle the most with understanding the effects of climate change because we can't relate to melting ice caps or a raising sea level, but in fact, there are very real effects that West Virginians are feeling in their own backyard. First thing is, it's hot. In September and October of last year, West Virginia had some of the hottest temperatures ever recorded during those months. Huntington, Beckley, Elkins, and Clarksburg recorded their hottest September ever. A lot of the climate change effects in West Virginia have to do with water, and that's one thing that the Mountain Hydrology Lab at West Virginia University is currently researching.
The Mountain Hydrology Lab focuses on understanding the circulation of water, what processes control how much water we get and when, and then also looking at how issues such as climate change and land use change and mineral development affects water from the perspective of water quantity and water quality. And we're specifically interested in using our science to benefit West Virginians, as a state, as a community.
What are some things that you guys have found out so far?
So, and this is going to be stating the obvious, but West Virginia has a lot of water, right? We have creeks, streams, and rivers everywhere. And so West Virginia is the 14th wettest state in the country. And we have over 50,000 miles of creeks, streams, and rivers in West Virginia, which is pretty mind-blowing if you think about, what a small state we are. We have an abundance of water. But unfortunately, just because we have an abundance of water doesn't mean we're water rich.
The Mountain Hydrology Lab found that West Virginia struggles with water security, which means we have trouble with having clean and reliable water to maintain a quality of life. Getting back to the water cycle intensification, since more water is in the air, more intense water events are affecting the state, like the 2016 Thousand-Year Flood. The Thousand-Year Flood in the southern and central parts of the state took place after parts of the state received between 8 and 9 inches of rain in 2 days. The flood resulted in 23 deaths, making it the deadliest flash flood in the United States since the 2010 Tennessee floods. Like the name says, this type of weather event is known for only coming around every 1,000 years, but research is indicating that because of climate change, we can expect this type of weather more often.
And then we ask the question of, well, where do most West Virginians live? And of course, that's along creeks, rivers, and streams. Where's all of our infrastructure, our roads, our bridges, our culverts, our railway systems, our water treatment facilities? Those are all along our water corridors.
But because water has to evaporate in the air in order for rain to fall, we're also likely to see more intense drought.
What we risk is missing what's important to our ecosystems, of having kind of a normalized middle ground of what we expect in terms of river and streams flowing at certain levels that are keep people out of harm's way.
Last fall was a great example where the governor declared a state of emergency for all 55 counties because of a prolonged drought. And when we have more droughts, there's less water available for the economy, for people to water their yards. With less water, there's more concentration of pollutions in our streams, which increases the costs of taxpayers for having water treatment.
Experts say what makes this even scarier is that the state's infrastructure is not adequate to deal with these issues. According to the National Inventory of Dams, almost 90% of dams in West Virginia have either a high or significant hazard potential.
We also have tremendous pollution issues related to inadequate infrastructure to treat water, whether that's septic systems, whether that's sewer systems, whether that's water treatment facilities.
A report by the National Resources Defense Council found that 36 out of the 55 West Virginia counties are in the top third worst in the nation for violations of the Federal Safe Drinking Water Act.
Nobody wants to drink unsafe water. And how can you possibly keep people in the state and recruit people to the state and recruit businesses to the state if there isn't the certainty that workers, the workforce, are going to have clean, reliable, safe water?
On top of that, West Virginia is a headwater state, which means that because of our elevation, water from our state flows down to lots of other states. So the water quality in our state directly affects water in other states as well. So we talked about water as a resource for us humans, but of course it's a resource for our state's animals too. One specific example, our state fish, the eastern brook trout, which requires cold water to live.
Those brook trout can only survive if the water stays cool and cold at a certain temperature. If it starts to warm too much, they will not survive. And that is already a threat we're seeing, is that some of those native brook trout patches could be threatened by these warming temperatures. And, you know, there's such a heritage in our state and identity tied to hunting and fishing and trout fishing. It's a big economic driver for the state. So again, if we risk losing a resource that is a part of our way of life and also a part of our tourism and economy.
Other species that are at risk include the red spruce, the northern flying squirrel, and Cheat Lake mountain salamanders. On the flip side, last episode we talked about invasive species taking over our ecosystem, and now these signs are popping up along the Morgantown Rail Trail and the West Virginia University Core Arboretum. The spotted lanternfly, which is native to China, found its way to eastern Pennsylvania in 2014. The fly feeds on tree sap, which damages trees, and they excrete honeydew, which damages plants by encouraging the growth of mold. According to the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture, the flies threaten the agriculture industry, and they're also just super annoying to deal with. They cover trees, swarm the air, and the honeydew they excrete is hard to get off of decks and playgrounds. It's difficult to say if the spread of the fly is related directly to climate change, but studies from the U.S. Department of Agriculture are showing that the spotted lanternfly thrives in the warm, dry conditions that climate change creates. With fewer cold snaps to keep them in check, the hemlock woolly adelgid and the emerald ash borer will continue to kill trees in a similar way. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about California for a little bit, but I promise this is relevant to West Virginia. Just be patient. When we talk about climate change, California comes up a lot. We're aware of the wildfires, we're aware of the droughts, which at this point they're overpumping groundwater to make up for. According to a report from the California Department of Water Resources, 85% of Californians rely on groundwater for some portion of their water supply. California's climate is the most variable of any state, and some years can be more dry or wet than others, which affects the groundwater. However, the 20-year groundwater level trend map paints a bleak picture with a whole lot of red and orange downtrending arrows. But California has one crucial thing that West Virginians rely on, and that's fresh produce.
West Virginia has the greatest reliance on California out of any mid-Atlantic state for our fresh food. So whether we're talking wildfires or earthquakes or any sort of disruption to our food, to our energy, to our clothes, to our entire economy, that impacts us through increased costs for food, for gasoline, for oil, and it delays the efficiency of our economy.
One thing I have covered in the past is our state's issues with food security and how it links to our state having the second highest obesity rate in the nation.
Food insecurity and obesity are related to one another. It sounds counterintuitive, but food insecurity is about not having enough money to take care of, to provide food for your family. And what happens when families are trying to stretch their food budget is they often spend a lot of that budget on low-cost foods because they have to. So they're making the lower cost option, they're making the fast food option, they're buying food that is convenient, it's less expensive, but it's high in calories and it's low in nutritional value.
So one could imagine that if fresh produce was even more expensive, a lot of West Virginians who are already struggling to have access to fresh produce would have even more trouble affording healthy food options. Of course, food security has a serious impact on people living in poverty in the state, But that's not the only sector where money is potentially being spent on the effects of climate change. Flooding comes with a cost to the state, insurance companies, and the individual. And the more polluted water is, the more difficult it is for water treatment facilities to treat the water. Therefore, the more expensive the water bill will be. All these things make vulnerable populations more vulnerable.
A plastic bottle of water from Walmart is really, really great when you don't have water and you're thirsty and you need to drink water. But we have fresh water in West Virginia everywhere, not all clean and healthy. And so, the question becomes like, how do we want to live our lives? Do we want to be dependent on this disposable society where there are very few winners and lots of losers? We have a disproportionate amount of trash. We have polluted air, we have polluted water, we have polluted communities. Or do we want to rethink about how we're doing this thing so everybody has the opportunity to live in a healthy place, have a healthy job, creating products that are meaningful for West Virginians and meaningful for the world?
Is there a possibility that we can save money over time by being more environmentally cautious? Or is it impossible to fix the environment and the economy at the same time? Here's a peek at what's ahead in the final part of the Climate Change in West Virginia series.
We don't have to spend billions of dollars to clean our water for the tap if we can manage our watersheds appropriately.
So those companies just say, no, we can't come to West Virginia because if we plug into the grid, we get mostly coal-based electricity and very little renewables, and that's just not acceptable anymore.
The pattern we see is that those communities that are already disenfranchised, maybe economically, environmentally, are again bearing more of the brunt of the problem.